به شما بینندگان و مخاطبین گرامی وبسایت و کانال یوتیوب ایران و اسرائیل. با سری برنامه‌های یادی از گذشته در خدمت شما هستیم که در این برنامه ما به گفتگوهای رسانه‌ای جناب منشه امیر می‌پردازیم که ایشون در طول 43 سال گذشته با رسانه‌های بین‌المللی داشتند و البته به زبان‌های مختلف از جمله انگلیسی، عبری و فارسی و بعضاً عربی صورت گرفته و در هر برنامه ما به یکی از این گفتگوها و برنامه‌ها می‌پردازیم. در این برنامه ما به گفتگویی از آقای منشه امیر می‌پردازیم که به زبان انگلیسی صورت گرفته و برمیگرده به حدوداً 20 سال پیش که در این گفتگو پرسشگر از آقای منشه امیر در مورد فتنه‌گری‌های حکومت ایران در آن زمان می‌پردازه و آقای منشه امیر در پاسخ به این پرسش عنوان می‌کنند که همه این فعالیت‌های مخرب و تروریستی جمهوری اسلامی به این خاطر هست که این امید رو داره که بتونه بر کشورهای منطقه و همه کشورهای مسلمان نشین تسلط پیدا کنه و به قول خودشون انقلاب خودشون رو صادر بکنن. و آقای امیر عنوان میکنه که این آرزویی هست که سران حکومت اون رو علنا اعلام کردن. در ادامه این صحبت آقای منشه امیر این نکته رو عنوان میکنه که قبرس به یک پایگاه تروریستی برای رژیم جمهوری اسلامی تبدیل شده و این امر از زمانی گسترش پیدا کرده که پرواز مستقیم بین دو کشور برقرار شده و این موجب نگرانی هست. در مقابل خبرنگار از آقای امیر پرسش میکنه که رژیم جمهوری اسلامی چرا این فعالیت‌های تروریستی رو در سوریه انجام نمیده که لازم به ذکر هست که در اون زمان حافظ اسد یعنی پدر بشار اسد رئیس جمهور سوریه بود و آقای امیر توضیح میدند که در واقع حافظ اسد این اجازه رو به رژیم جمهوری اسلامی نمیده و تذکر داده و هشدار داده که رژیم اجازه نداره که در واقع از سوریه به عنوان یک پایگاه برای صدور تروریسم به منطقه و کشورهای دیگر در جهان استفاده بکنه. البته در سالهای بعد و با مرگ حافظ اسد و به قدرت رسیدن بشار اسد و زمانی که مردم سوریه بر علیه بشار اسد قیام کردند، رئیس جمهور این کشور از نیروهای نظامی و نیرویی که به سپاه قدس شهرت داره دعوت کرد که به خاک سوریه بیان و در واقع کمک کردند به بشار اسد برای سرکوب مردم و کشتاری که تا به امروز ادامه داره. آقای امیر در ادامه صحبت خودشون به این نکته اشاره می‌کنند که رژیم جمهوری اسلامی ادعای رهبری جهان اسلام رو داره و در این راستا با همه سازمان‌های اسلامی در سراسر جهان تماس میگیره و البته که در ادامه آقای امیر توضیح میدند که رژیم جمهوری اسلامی تا به امروز یعنی در اون زمان که این گفتگو انجام شده هیچ موفقیتی در این زمینه به دست نیاورده و البته که شاهد هستیم با گذشت سالها با گذشت حداقل 20 سال از اون روز رژیم جمهوری اسلامی هنوز هم نتونسته ادعای خودش رو مبنی بر رهبری جهان اسلام ثابت بکنه و کمتر کشور اسلامی هست که رهبری جمهوری اسلامی و شخص علی خامنه‌ای رو به عنوان رهبر مسلمانان جهان قبول کرده باشه. آقای امیر در ادامه صحبت خودش بار دیگر میپردازه به خطر امنیتی که از جانب حضور رژیم جمهوری اسلامی در خاک قبرس و پایتخت قبرس وجود داره و عنوان میکنن که تردیدی ندارم که اگر رژیم جمهوری اسلامی به نحوی بتونه پایتخت قبرس نیکوزیا رو به تسلط خودش در بیاره و یا دست کم فعالیت‌های خودش رو در اونجا گسترش بده، از اونجایی که گروه‌های تروریستی فلسطینی و دیگر سازمان‌های اسلامی در قبرس حضور دارند، در واقع حضور و فعالیت رژیم جمهوری اسلامی این خطر امنیتی رو برای اسرائیل بزرگتر و مهمتر میکنه و این نشون میده که در آن روزگار دولت و سازمانهای امنیتی اسرائیل از حضور رژیم جمهوری اسلامی در خاک قبرس نگران بودند و طبیعتاً اقداماتی در این زمینه شاید صورت گرفته باشه. میبینیم و میشنویم گفتگوی رسانه‌ای آقای منشه امیر در بیش از 20 سال گذشته.
بسیار ممنون. من فکر می‌کنم که این گفتگو بسیار مهم است. همونطور که شما اشاره کردید رژیم جمهوری اسلامی در خاک قبرس Menashe Amir, there have been reports in the international news media to the effect that Cyprus is being used by the Iranians as a base of operations, as a communications hub for terrorist activities throughout the Middle East. Is this true?
The Iranians have established their airline flights, daily flight from Tehran to Nicosia 3 years ago, and since then Nicosia and all Cyprus is a main base of Iranian activities in the Middle East and in Europe, especially after the Iranians have been limited and they have been, it was hard for them to act in Damascus after Hafez Assad came.
Yes, but when you but don't worry about that because we're going to edit, obviously.
Yeah, I know.
Okay. Yes? Okay. But I thought that Damascus was the major center. After all, in Damascus, the Iranians have a large cultural center, and there's a great deal of travel back and forth between Tehran and Damascus. There's an alliance, a formal alliance between the two countries, and a certain identity of interests vis-a-vis Israel, at least in Lebanon, for example. Why would Cyprus be necessary if the Iranians have Syria?
It's true that Damascus have been served for years as the main operational base of Iranian terrorist activities, together with Hafez Assad, together with all terrorist Palestinian organizations. But since Assad has changed his policy and he doesn't let the Iranians to be active and to act freely as they have been in the past, they moved their main center of activity into Nicosia.
Well, what's the purpose of all this? I mean, it sounds, frankly, as an American, it sounds almost like fiction. I mean, what does their activity mean? When you say their activity, what's their theater of operations altogether? And what are they trying to achieve with the kind of operations that presumably they are engaging in?
The Iranians, I mean the Shiites, have been a minority in the Islamic world. And now that there is one Shiite country and government, they try to spread the revolution, their religious ideas. And they do it by two means. First, by propaganda and by religious activities all over the world, and contact with all Islamic organizations, whether it's in Eastern Europe or Western Europe, in London, Paris, or Madrid. And on the same time, they are engaged in terrorist activities for serving their political aim, as it happens in Algeria, in Egypt, and other parts of the world.
Is there some sort of a hookup between, let's say, Nicosia and Khartoum? Because we hear of Khartoum as a major client of the Iranian extremist policy.
The Iranians have some problems in Sudan to be active because the Sudanese government has limited their activities, and they are very much supervised. They cooperate in some cases in Africa together, but Nicosia is the main Iranian center for activities in Western Europe.
What kind of activities are there in Western Europe?
Their main contact with Islamic fundamentalist organizations in Marseille, in France, in Paris, in London, in Algeria, and other parts of the world.
What's the purpose of these Shiite organizations in Western Europe? What's their objective?
Their objective is to serve Islam and to have much more, to recruit much more political activists to spread the Iranian revolution all over the world.
Well, does this express itself in actual operations in the field? Because if it's just a question of theology and ideology, perhaps it's something that we in the Western world who advocate democracy simply can put under our belt? Or is there some nefarious aspect in all this?
The Iranians think that by militant activities they can recruit all the Muslims and bring them to be active for the case of Islam. That's the way that they think that they can make their cause much more active and fruitful.
Menashe Amir, if that's the case, they haven't been doing very well in the Balkans because the logical client, namely Bosnia, has been a victim of military assaults and not the victor by any means. Or has Iran simply not taken much interest in the plight of the Bosnian Muslims?
Iranians are very much interested in the plight of Bosnians. They called it the new crusade of Christians against Islam to prevent an Islamic country in the heart of Europe. The Iranians tried to send forces, to send arms for the Muslim Bosnians. They couldn't do it well, but there are rumors that there are some Iranian soldiers actually fighting in Bosnia for the sake of the Muslims.
Do you have any information to the effect that the Nicosia base also serves Sarajevo?
Nicosia base serves all Europe and North Africa and the Middle East. So it's the main operational center of Iran. The Iranians have a big embassy there. They have many employees, local and those who came from Iran. And don't forget that Nicosia is also a base for activities of Palestinians, of Islamic groups in the Middle East. So it's a kind of alliance and cooperation between Iranians and all the extremist organizations who have chosen Nicosia as their main base of activity.
Now, if we exclude for the moment a phenomenon like the Hezbollah in Lebanon and move directly towards the Israeli coast, opposite Cyprus, if we move towards, let's say, the Gaza Strip or even the West Bank, perhaps even towards Israel, antebellum Israel, the entire area which is in dispute anyway, does the Nicosia link in the Iranian grid affect incidents or situations which develop in the places I've just mentioned, Gaza Strip, West Bank, and Israel?
No doubt about it. Beirut has been for years a center of meeting and contacts between Iran and all the fundamentalist groups who are active in the territories. But more and more it's difficult for these Muslim activists to get into Beirut. So they come to Nicosia, they meet the Iranian delegates, and they take the money, they take the plans, they have meetings and consultations and planning all their activities.
If we shift our focus to, shall we say, one of the jewels of the Middle East, maybe it's the most precious jewel because it spans the two continents, Africa and Asia, and it embraces the Suez Canal, and of course I'm referring to Egypt. Could it be that the Iranian strategy is aiming at the destabilization of the secularist Arab Republic of Egypt under the incumbent president Hosni Mubarak towards its replacement by some kind of an Islamic regime which might be fundamentalist in its philosophy and therefore in some way sympathetic with Iran? Is this what is actually happening in the land of the Nile?
The aim of Iran is to spread Islam, the Shiite Islam, and to help the so-called oppressed people. So the Iranians claim that all the so-called reactionary regimes in the Arab world are against the real Islam. So reaching the aim, Iran has to overthrow all the existing regimes, whether it is in Egypt or in Saudi Arabia or in Jordan or Kuwait and other countries. So for overthrowing these regimes, they have to wage a vast sabotage and terrorist activities against the actual governments, and that's exactly what Iran is trying to do in Egypt through all these fundamentalist Muslims.
But how can the Iranians get to first base, as we say in America, in Egypt, if the predominant denomination of Islam in Egypt is the Sunni denomination? Surely you're not suggesting that the rank and file, oppressed and downtrodden Egyptians are going to embrace Shia and doff the Sunnah, which they've accepted for almost 1,500 or more years.
Iran is trying to minimize the difference between Shiites and Sunnis, and they hide the real intention of bringing all the Islamic world into a Shiite community. And for the moment, the fundamentalists in Egypt who are cooperating with Iran, they don't mind the religious ideas of Iran. They need the Iranian facilities and support for their activities.
Would you go so far as to say that since the since the collapse, in fact, the disintegration of the USSR and the end of the Cold War and the end of the prolonged confrontation between the United States on the one hand and the Soviet Union on the other, that we now are moving into a new era in which there is a confrontation between the United States and perhaps the West and resurgent Shiite Islam? Is that the world we live in today? Is that what's happening? Is Iran actually the countervailing power in the world vis-a-vis the United States?
Iran is much less important than Soviet Union has been, but the Iranians, with their ideology of combining the religious fundamentalism with terrorist activities, has been a danger for the civilized Western world.
And Nicosia is therefore a focal point, a springboard for the implementation of various acts which would achieve these Iranian goals. Is that indeed the case?
The Nicosia is one of the main bases of the Iranian activities, but the Iranians have many other bases all over the world, even inside the United States, in mosques in New Jersey or New York or other places. They have television programs and they have cultural centers. They try to use all the possibilities to spread their religious ideology.
Finally, is there what we would call a materialistic motive for the latitude that the Cypriots are giving the Iranians in Nicosia? That is to say, is there money coming in, Iranian money, which the Cypriots are glad to receive? And if you might, is the Iranian activity on the island as intense on the Turkish side as it is on the Greek side?
Cyprus is living upon tourism, and this is an open country and a meeting center for many communities and people from all over the Middle East. So Nicosia and the Cyprus government has been always receptive towards the foreigners. The fact that the Iranians don't need a visa to come to Cyprus, it makes it's very easy for them to get there. And that's one of the reasons that, and the strategic place of Cyprus in the Mediterranean Sea. But the main activity is in the Greek side of Cyprus, because Turks are very careful and they don't let the Iranians to be as active in their part than they are in the Greek part.
Why not?
Because Turkey is more linked to the Western countries. Turkey is frightened by itself from the Iranian terrorist activity inside Turkey, so they are trying to limit them and not to let them to be active freely.
Amir, thank you very, very much.
You're welcome.
By the way, how come this is being given much? Ken, cut away. How come this subject hasn't been given much publicity, at least not here?
An example how willing the Cyprus authorities are to let the foreigners to be active in the country.
What?
The Mossad agents have been caught when listening to the Iranian telephone
I have to make a note of that.
Conversations.
Let's just make a note of that.
The Cyprus government released the Israeli agents, and it let them go just by paying a big amount of money.
Well, I'm going to develop the subject to the extent, to the maximum. I don't know where it's going to lead, because I'm starting tabula rasa. You know, I mean, I have no real knowledge. I'm coming in like complete naive. You know, I don't know.
Are you doing it as a freelance or?
Yeah, you'll see when you watch tomorrow night at 10 o'clock. You'll see a 15-minute piece that we did about the presence of Alois Brunner, the SS criminal, in Syria. And we bring all the aspects, including some aspects that relate to Israel. So you'll see the approach. Whether there is substantial subversion, whether there might be a kind of an underground, whether the people, the masses, are really disenchanted with this, and of course disappointed with the regime, and are hoping for the fall of the religious, domination which has been imposed upon them, and that it might be just a matter of time. I'm sure that the CIA is trying to destabilize Iran and to bring about a change, but I don't have much confidence in the CIA. So
no, the main problems of the regime today is now they sell it for 11. It means that they have $7 billion less than they have anticipated and relied upon, and the prices are going up. People are hungry. They are very much disappointed from all the economic aspects of regime. There is no a freedom of speech. There is a limitation upon how people